How's it going, guys, and welcome to another video here today. Axel Williams, and today, guys, we're going to be talking about a classic horror movie, the 1996 cult horror classic, Scream. Yes, guys, Scream. What a film it is, guys. 1996 classic. We're not going to talk about any of the other ones because the other ones are very, very crap. But yes, guys, Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott. It really was a good film, guys. We're going to be talking a little bit about how Scream did things differently in terms of slashers. And why Scream was actually quite a unique slasher film when you compare it to the likes of Friday the 13th and Halloween. Now, a lot of us have obviously watched Halloween and Friday the 13th and, you know, A Nightmare on Elm Street, in these kind of horror movies where it's a killer stalking its victims in some way and then killing them, but in a kind of gritty, terrifying way. You know, like a proper slasher film where it's literally blood and glory. With Halloween, it was Michael Myers standing on street corners, and it was he's not a hooker or anything. But, you know, it was a slasher that built an atmosphere. You know, you got Michael Myers standing on these street corners, he's watching his victims. It was all very suspenseful and very kind of dark. And A Nightmare on Elm Street, obviously, is pretty terrifying for most, where it's a guy called Freddy Krueger who comes and kills you in your dreams. And I think every single person thought that was pretty terrifying. But this is where Scream goes in the completely other direction. The first thing I love about Scream, and this is probably one of the main things that I love about Scream, is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. And Scream was probably one of the first slasher films, if not the first slasher film I saw, and I think it was the first slasher film that I saw, where it actually took the mick out of all the slasher tropes. You know, there was a lot of comments made in Scream towards all the generic traits that slasher horror movies have. They poked fun at all of the cheesy aspects of slasher horror movies. One of my favourite aspects about Scream, and this is nothing to do with obviously the fact that it's making fun of other slasher films, because we've obviously talked about that. It's actually the fact, in my view, that the movie continuously tries to throw you off track as to who is the killer. And which actually brings me on nicely to the actual twist at the end of the film as well. It's the actual twist for the film, and this is something that I think shocked a lot of people. Whenever anybody has probably watched Scream, they probably expect there to be one killer. Every slasher film I've ever seen has had one killer. You know, you look at Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't know why I can't think of any other ones, but there is a lot of other ones as well. But, you know, you watch all these slasher films over the years, and there's actually always one killer. In any murder film, there's always one killer, but this film did a great job of throwing you off track as to who was the killer. It did a fantastic job of throwing you off track as to who was the killer. Sidney Prescott gets attacked in her home. Billy Loomis climbs through the window. You know, Sidney gets attacked in her home. Billy Loomis climbs through the window. He drops his gloves and his cell phone, and Sidney thinks it's him. He actually dropped his cell phone in Scary Movie, not in Scream. Sorry. Billy Loomis drops his cell phone in Scream, and his cell phone and his knife and his gloves in Scary Movie. If you've ever seen Scary Movie, give it a, you know, if you haven't seen it, give it a watch. Scary Movie, it's very funny. Scary Movie. It is literally a parody of Scream. Then Billy gets arrested, and you realise that his cell phone has come back clean, so it wasn't him that made the calls to Sidney to obviously threaten her. So again, it makes you then think, who is it? If it's not Billy, is it Randy? Is it Stu? And they did a really good job of throwing you off track, and that's what brings me on to the biggest twist of all. No matter how many twists and turns the movie took, I would never have guessed in a million years, in a month of Sundays, that there was going to be two killers in Scream. I would never have guessed that there was going to be two killers in Scream. It's actually Billy and Stu that are the killers in Scream, and you would never have guessed it. I would never have thought it, because the way the film is actually made and the way the scenes are shot, it always makes it just look like there's one killer. You know, it's just one guy going on in the costume, the ghost face costume. You would never have guessed that it was more than one person. You would never have guessed it was more than one person. Obviously, the film does a good job of keeping the height the same, because I don't think it was Billy and Stu in the actual costumes while the murders in the films were being committed. I would imagine it was someone who actually was wearing the costume. That wasn't actually one of the actual cast members. Just for the fact that the height difference, if it was Stu swapping to Billy, swapping to Stu, swapping to Billy, swapping to Stu, you would probably see the height change throughout the scenes and the build. That's just my guess. Scream has actually inspired a lot of other slashers of the same kind of feel, because prior to Scream, I had never actually seen the light-hearted kind of, you know, high feel, fun tone slasher film. You know, I always felt films like Urban Legend always reminded me of Scream. I Know What You Did Last Summer reminded me of Scream. It was like, you know, the high school kids. And the film was always, you know, it wasn't really a dark toned film. It was always a bit cheesy and a bit light-hearted. And I remember I hadn't really seen those kind of films till I'd watched Scream. So Scream, for me, I don't know if some of those films were made prior to Scream. I'm pretty sure I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend were made following Scream, the original Scream film. So I'm not quite sure how many slasher films like that were made before Scream, but I always felt Scream inspired that kind of high school, you know, those high school kids being stalked by a murder type of slashers. The only issue with Scream, and it's the same with a lot of other slashers, in fact every other slasher, is they make too many of them, don't they? Scream 2, I said I wasn't going to talk too much about these ones because they're not very good, and they're not very good. But in my opinion, actually, Scream is one of those movies, and probably one of the few movies to actually go, in terms of which movies are the best, I think Scream goes in the complete order of when they were made. I think Scream 1 is the best, I think Scream 2 is second best, 3 is third best, 4 is fourth and fifth, and so on. I think that is honestly how the Scream movies go. I think that's their order of quality. But again, Scream 2, it's basically the same film with a different coat of paint. I mean, it is literally the same film. It's literally the two killers. They try and throw you off track. One thing that bugged me about Scream, and the fact that they made so many of them, that bugged me as well. But another thing that really bugged me about Scream is the simple fact, why is there so many copycat killers? I don't think there'll be that many copycat killers. Why is there so many killers that are obsessed with Sydney? That's just stupid, isn't it? I mean, why do all these killers want to kill Sydney? I mean, I have heard of copycat killers, but not 6 of them. And not trying to kill the same person. I mean, come on, you're just ruining it now. You're just killing it. And Sydney looks like, I mean, Neve Campbell looks like she's literally given up all the fight, because in the latest Scream, you know, the latest Scream that she was in, she just looks old, doesn't she? I mean, she looks like she's given up. She looks like she's given up. But Scream is a cult classic, isn't it? I mentioned, obviously, Jeepers Creepers recently. These are kind of some movies. I don't know if Scream... I think Scream does get the mentions that it should. I think Scream is a well-talked-about film. I think Scream is a well-respected film. Obviously, they've made so many sequels. You know, they've made endless sequels to Scream. But, you know, you wouldn't say Ghostface is as iconic as Michael Myers. You probably wouldn't say Ghostface is as iconic as Jason Voorhees. But, you know, it's still a fantastic film. And I think Ghostface is the costume itself is fantastic, isn't it? I believe the costume itself for Ghostface was actually, the mask itself, I should say, was inspired by that painting of that woman. Was that the Mona Lisa? No, it's not the Mona Lisa, is it? I don't know what that painting's called. It's that painting with that woman's literally pressing her cheeks in and her mouth's really... I'm pretty sure Scream was inspired by that painting. And Scream just goes to show, it just goes to show that if you refuse to have sex with your boyfriend, you could be murdered. A shout out as well to the actual voice work for Scream as well, the actual on-phone voice. That is a great voice, isn't it? You know, when he calls them up, are you alone in the house? I know that wasn't a very good impression, but you get the gist. I mean, the voice is fantastic, isn't it? You know, the actual Ghostface phone voice is another reason, I think, as well, why I always found Scream to be really cool, because I always wanted, after watching that film, to call someone up and put on that voice and do a perfect impression of that voice. Or just, you know, go on my phone and find an app where you can find the Ghostface voice. That voice is so brilliantly iconic, isn't it now? It's such an iconic voice. The one thing I always found funny as well was right at the end of the film, when Billy and Stu reveal themselves to be the killers, when they actually hold the microphone up to their mouth and they do the voice, "Surprise, Sydney." It doesn't sound anything like the guy on the phone. And that's to be expected, because it's not the voice that was used on the phone. But that always cracked me up as well, the fact that I was thinking, that doesn't sound anything like the guy on the phone. Have you just been playing us this whole time? But yes, guys, Scream. I mean, a classic. It's a classic film, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Scream, though. If you haven't watched it, give it a watch. I'd imagine many of you have watched it. If you like horror, if you like watching my videos, you've probably watched Scream. But yes, guys, Scream, a classic. For me, my favourite slasher. I know people will look at Halloween probably as the most iconic at this point. You know, Michael Myers. And Michael Myers probably is the most iconic slasher killer, but I think Scream is the best of the slasher films. In my view, I've always loved Scream, the first one. I've never been a fan of the rest of them, to be honest with you. I don't think it's not really a horse you can ride more than once, is it, Scream? I mean, once it's been done, you know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? This is what I don't get about these slasher films, are they continuously make and make and make. They just repeat themselves constantly. I know a lot of films do it, but Scream does it. Scream just repeats itself so often. You know, you've literally got a killer going after Sydney in the first one, 2 killers, and then you've got 2 killers going after her in the next one, then 2 killers going after her. It's just silly. It really is silly. I think it was the third one where it was only 1 killer, but either way, it's just so repetitive, isn't it? It gets boring after a while, but the first one was such a good film, and I think it changed the ball game for slasher films as well. It changed the direction of slasher films and how slasher films looked and felt during that time. But yes, guys, Scream. Give me your thoughts, guys, on the movie. I hope you enjoyed this video as well. Like and subscribe, and I will see you for another video very shortly. Yeah, well, I'll see you very soon. Guys, take care of yourself and have a good day, and I'll see you soon. Ta-ta.